The day had started like any other for the driver. He woke up early, long before the sun had fully risen, and stretched his arms as he thought about the long hours ahead. His job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and he carried a quiet pride in that. He had been driving for Uber Eats for some time now, weaving through neighborhoods and busy streets, delivering meals that kept people smiling. It wasn't always easy, but it was the best way he knew to keep food on the table and make sure his loved ones never went without. That morning, he packed a small breakfast into a paper bag and set it on the passenger seat. It wasn't much, just a sandwich and a bottle of water, but it gave him energy for the road. He checked his phone to make sure the app was ready, then started the engine of his old sedan. The car had seen better days, its paint chipped in places, but it was reliable. He had learned to be grateful for things like that. As he drove through the city, he noticed the world slowly coming alive. The streets filled with workers, children walking to school, and shopkeepers unlocking doors. The driver kept a steady focus on the road, waiting for the familiar ding of his next order. When it came, he followed the directions, picking up food from a local diner. The smell of fresh fries and burgers filled his car, and he chuckled to himself, wishing he could sneak one for his own lunch. The morning passed with a rhythm he knew well. Pick up, drop off, smile politely, and move on to the next. Some customers were friendly, offering a thank you or a small tip. Others barely glanced at him, their eyes glued to their phones. But he didn't mind. He understood everyone was caught up in their own worlds. He was simply grateful for the chance to earn something each day. By afternoon, the sun was high and the heat pressed down on the streets. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand as he rolled down the windows for some air. The car's AC had stopped working months ago, but he had learned to live without it. He had just completed another delivery when the app directed him to a neighborhood he didn't often visit. It was a quiet area with tree-lined streets and houses that stood side by side, each with small gardens and picket fences. It looked peaceful, the kind of place where children played freely outside without a care in the world. He slowed the car as he searched for the right address, his eyes scanning the house numbers. That was when he heard it, the sound that would change everything. At first he thought it was fireworks. The sharp cracking noise echoed across the street, and for a moment he was confused. But then he noticed the sudden panic around him. A woman screamed in the distance, someone yelled for others to get down, and the driver realized with a chill running down his spine that these were not fireworks. These were gunshots. His heart pounded. He had never been this close to such danger before. His first instinct was to duck lower in his seat, but as his eyes darted around, he saw something that froze him. There, across the street, stood a young boy. The child couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. His backpack hung loosely on one shoulder, and his small frame shook as he stood frozen in the middle of the sidewalk. He wasn't running like the others. He wasn't hiding. He was standing there, too scared to move, his eyes wide with shock as the chaos unfolded. The driver's chest tightened. He knew he had seconds, maybe less, to decide. He could have stayed in his car, locked the doors, and driven off. No one would blame him. But something inside him, something stronger than fear, pushed him to act. He threw open his car door and ran. "Move, kid, move!" he shouted, his voice carrying urgency. But the boy didn't move. His small legs seemed rooted to the ground, paralyzed by fear. Without thinking, the driver sprinted across the street. He didn't care about the danger. The only thing in his mind was reaching that boy. His footsteps pounded against the pavement as the noise of panic echoed around him. He reached the child and grabbed him firmly, pulling him down toward the ground. The boy let out a small cry of surprise, but the driver didn't stop. "Stay down," he said, shielding the child with his own body. He pulled the boy behind a parked car, crouching low, his arms wrapped tightly around him. The sound of bullets striking nearby walls made his heart jump, but he kept his body between the boy and the danger. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, every sound amplified by the rush of adrenaline. Finally, the shots stopped. Silence fell over the street, broken only by the distant sound of sirens approaching. The driver looked down at the boy who clung to him tightly, his face buried in the man's shirt. The driver's heart softened. The child was trembling but alive. "It's okay. You're safe now," the driver whispered, his own voice shaking with relief. Neighbors began to emerge cautiously from their homes, peeking around corners, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Some pointed toward the driver, their eyes wide with shock at what he had done. Others rushed forward to check on the boy, but the child refused to let go of the man who had shielded him. The driver's knees ached from crouching, and his chest was still pounding, but he didn't move. He just held the boy, letting him feel that someone was there, someone who wouldn't let harm come to him. As the sirens grew louder, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The driver had not thought about himself, his safety, or what might happen if he got caught in the crossfire. All he had thought about was the small child standing alone, too afraid to move. And in that moment, an ordinary delivery worker had done something extraordinary. He didn't know it yet, but his actions that day would soon spread far beyond that quiet street. His story would move people he had never met, people across the entire nation. But in that moment, all he knew was that he had saved a child's life, and that was enough. The moments after the shooting were some of the longest the driver had ever experienced. He stayed low behind the parked car, holding the young boy close, listening to the distant sound of sirens as they drew nearer. The boy was shaking uncontrollably, his tiny hands clutching the driver's shirt like a lifeline. The driver could feel the rapid heartbeat of the child against his chest, and it made his own heart pound harder. He whispered reassuring words over and over, hoping the boy could hear the calm in his voice, even if he could not yet understand it. When the first police car arrived, the driver slowly moved to the side of the street, still shielding the boy. Officers jumped out, their weapons drawn, scanning every corner. He raised a hand indicating that the child was safe. The boy, still trembling, looked up at the officers with wide eyes. One of the officers immediately came over and crouched beside them, speaking softly to the boy, telling him he was safe now and that nothing would hurt him anymore. The driver let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His arms were stiff and sore from holding the child, but he didn't let go. The boy's parents had arrived by now, running down the street toward them. The mother's face was pale and streaked with tears, her hands shaking as she reached for her child. The boy screamed with relief and flung his arms around her neck, still clutching the driver with one hand. The mother looked up at the driver, her eyes wide with gratitude, and whispered a trembling, "Thank you." The father was close behind, calling out for his son and then looking at the driver with disbelief and gratitude. "You saved him. You saved my son," he said, his voice breaking. The driver shook his head, insisting it had been nothing. He didn't see it as heroism. He had simply done what any person should do in such a moment. But the parents refused to let him minimize it. They thanked him over and over, tears running freely now. As the police officers secured the area, asking questions and taking statements, neighbors began to gather. Whispers spread quickly from person to person. Some held their phones, already recording the scene. Others shook their heads in disbelief, murmuring about the courage of the man who had risked everything to save a child. The driver felt a mix of relief and unease. He was glad the boy was safe, but the attention made him uncomfortable. He hadn't done it for recognition. Still, he stayed long enough to give his statement to the police, describing what he had seen and how he had acted to protect the boy. They asked him to recount the events carefully, noting the courage and quick thinking he had displayed. When the officers finished, one of them patted his shoulder and said, "You did something incredible today. You saved a life." The words sank in slowly. He had saved a life. The driver eventually left, returning to his car and sitting for a moment to catch his breath. He felt drained, every muscle tense, but a quiet satisfaction filled him. He had not known what would happen when he ran across that street, but he had acted and the boy had survived because of it. As he drove away, he noticed people still standing outside their homes, talking in hushed voices. He realized that what had seemed like a brief, terrifying moment to him had been witnessed by many, and he wondered what stories would be told about it. Within hours, videos of the incident began to appear online. A neighbor had recorded the moment he had shielded the child, the camera shaking slightly as they captured the raw intensity of the situation. People around the world watched the clip, their reactions ranging from awe to disbelief. Comments poured in, calling him a hero and praising the bravery of someone willing to risk their life for a stranger. The driver saw none of this at first. He didn't follow the news. He didn't check his phone until later, and even then he was hesitant to look. When he finally did, he was stunned. Messages from strangers filled his social media accounts, some offering thanks, some asking to meet him, and others offering support in ways he could not have imagined. He read the words slowly, realizing that the story of his action had spread far beyond the quiet neighborhood where it had happened. People were moved, inspired, and grateful. And yet he remained the same man who had walked those streets every day, delivering food and trying to make a living. The boy's parents insisted on meeting him in person again, inviting him to their home to thank him properly. The driver was hesitant at first, unsure what to expect, but he eventually agreed. When he arrived, he was greeted warmly. The boy ran to him, wrapping his small arms around the driver's waist. "I knew you would save me," the child said softly. The driver knelt to look into his eyes, trying to respond in a way that didn't scare him further. "I'm glad you're safe," he said, and it was the truth. The family insisted on preparing a small meal for him, which he accepted. They talked quietly, sharing stories about the boy's life, his school, and the little things that made him laugh. The driver felt a strange connection to the family, one that went beyond gratitude. They had allowed him to be part of a moment that had changed their lives, and in return they had become a part of his story as well. As evening fell, the driver returned home, exhausted but unable to sleep. He kept thinking about the boy, about the terror in his eyes, and about the brief moment when he had made the decision to act. It was a moment that would stay with him forever. He also thought about the reactions he had seen online. While he didn't seek attention, he realized that perhaps the story could inspire others. Perhaps it could remind people that ordinary actions can have extraordinary consequences. The next few days were a whirlwind. Reporters called asking to hear his side of the story. Community leaders reached out inviting him to speak about courage and safety. Messages poured in from strangers, some sharing their own stories of bravery, others simply expressing gratitude. He felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. He had not wanted to be in the spotlight. He had simply acted out of instinct and compassion. The boy's family became a central part of his life in the following weeks. They invited him to school events, birthday parties, and community gatherings. The child's laughter, once so fragile and hesitant, became a sound the driver cherished. He saw firsthand how a single act could ripple outward, affecting not just one life but many. People in the neighborhood who had witnessed the event began to look at him differently. They greeted him with smiles, sometimes offering small tokens of thanks. It was not money or recognition that mattered to him. It was the sense that his action had made a real difference. At work, things remained mostly the same, though he noticed a few subtle changes. Customers recognized him from the news clips or from social media, offering words of praise or small gestures of kindness. Some offered tips larger than usual, while others simply smiled, expressing admiration without needing anything in return. The driver accepted these gestures quietly, never wanting to boast but allowing himself to feel the warmth of appreciation. Through it all, he kept returning in his mind to the moment of danger. He thought about the boy frozen in place, the sudden clarity that came over him when he realized what he had to do, and the rush of adrenaline that carried him to safety. He thought about the thin line between fear and action, and how sometimes courage was not about the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The community also began to take notice. Local schools invited him to talk about safety, community awareness, and the importance of helping others in times of crisis. He spoke simply, sharing his experience without embellishment, hoping to make the lessons real for the children listening. "You never know when you might need to help someone," he would say. And sometimes helping doesn't mean thinking about yourself first, it means acting because it's the right thing to do. The boy, meanwhile, grew closer to him. They would meet after school, sometimes walking to the park or sharing small meals. The child looked up to him not just as a hero, but as a friend. And the driver in turn found joy in these moments, realizing that the bond formed in that terrifying moment had created something lasting and meaningful. Days turned into weeks, and the initial media attention began to settle. But the story remained alive in the hearts of those who had witnessed it, and in the gratitude of the family whose lives had been forever changed. The driver, though modest and quiet, began to understand the larger impact of his actions. He had acted out of instinct, but what he had done resonated far beyond what he could have imagined. Every time he reflected on that day, he returned to the same thought. Courage was not always found in grand gestures or headlines. Sometimes it was found in the simple, instinctive choice to protect someone else, even if it meant risking everything for a stranger. And sometimes the smallest actions could leave the deepest marks, shaping lives, inspiring others, and moving a whole community toward hope, care, and humanity. He continued his work, delivering meals, driving through streets, and living his ordinary life. But inside, he carried the extraordinary memory of that day, the moment when fear turned into action, when instinct became heroism, and when a young boy's life was saved by someone who saw not danger, but the chance to do what was right. It was a story that would never leave him, a story that would continue to ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could not yet fully understand. And through it all he remained humble, grounded in the simple truth. He had acted because it was the right thing to do. The days after the incident passed in a blur, and the driver began to notice a change in the world around him. He was no longer just a man delivering meals from one door to another. Now, people in the neighborhood looked at him differently. Some waved as he drove by. Others stopped him on the street to shake his hand or offer a small nod of respect. It wasn't fame he was after, nor did he seek recognition, but he could feel the subtle shift in the air. He had become a symbol of courage without even trying. The videos that had spread online continued to gain attention. The clip of him shielding the young boy from danger was shared thousands of times, commented on and praised across social media. People called him a hero. Some wrote long posts about bravery, others offered messages of gratitude, and some simply marveled at the instinct that had made a stranger risk everything to save a child. At first, the driver avoided looking at these messages. He didn't want the attention, didn't feel comfortable being called a hero. But curiosity eventually got the better of him, and one evening, after finishing a long shift, he sat in his car and scrolled through the posts. As he read, he felt a mixture of emotions. Pride, yes, but also humility. He remembered the boy's small hands clutching his shirt, the fear in his eyes, and the pounding sound of his own heartbeat. That moment had been pure instinct, a rush of adrenaline and compassion combined. He hadn't thought about recognition or praise. He had only thought about protecting a child. Seeing the reaction of thousands of people across the country made him realize that the world still had a hunger for stories of humanity, for moments that reminded people that kindness and courage existed in ordinary places. Soon, reporters began calling. They asked to interview him, wanting to hear his story directly from the man who had saved the boy. The driver was hesitant. He had no experience speaking to the media, and the thought of being on television made him nervous. But the boy's parents encouraged him. People need to hear what really happened, the mother said gently. It's not about you being famous. It's about the message your actions send. Reluctantly, he agreed. When the day of the interview arrived, he sat in a simple room with a camera in front of him, lights shining and a journalist asking questions. He spoke slowly, honestly, and without exaggeration. He described the morning, the sound of the gunshots, the boy standing frozen in fear, and the instant decision to act. He told them about the small joys of his life, his work, his family, and the simple pride he took in earning an honest living. He didn't claim to be brave. He simply explained that he had seen a child in danger and did what he thought any person should do. The interview aired later that evening. Friends and neighbors watched, recognizing him on their screens. The story quickly gained national attention. It wasn't just a tale of danger and heroism. It was a story of compassion and humanity. People were moved by his humility, by the fact that someone ordinary had done something extraordinary. Messages of support poured in from strangers, offering thanks, encouragement, and sometimes even assistance. Some wanted to help him with bills, others simply wanted to meet him or shake his hand. The driver, as always, remained grounded. He appreciated the gestures, but he continued to live his life as he always had, delivering meals, driving through the streets, and caring for his family. The boy's parents were deeply involved in the unfolding story. They became close to the driver, inviting him into their home regularly. The child, once so scared and hesitant, now laughed freely around him, showing small drawings, sharing little stories from school, and asking questions about the world. The driver began to see the impact of that morning in ways he hadn't anticipated. The bond he had formed with the boy was deeper than gratitude. It was a connection that would last for years. The child looked up to him, not only as a hero but as someone who had shown him the value of courage, of acting for others, and of standing up when it mattered most. The media continued to follow the story. News outlets featured him in interviews. Social media pages shared updates about his life, and communities across the country began discussing the importance of bravery and compassion. Some local schools invited him to speak to students about courage, safety, and doing what was right. He initially declined these invitations, unsure of how to handle public speaking, but over time he realized the opportunity to share his experience could inspire others. He accepted the invitations quietly, speaking from the heart without grand gestures or overblown claims. He told the students that courage wasn't about fearlessness, it was about choosing to act even when you were scared. In the neighborhood where the shooting had occurred, life slowly began to return to normal. People went about their days with a new sense of awareness and community. The driver noticed that neighbors greeted one another more warmly, looked out for each other more attentively, and spoke openly about the importance of helping in moments of crisis. His simple act had not only saved a life but had also sparked conversations about humanity, compassion, and responsibility. The driver's own life began to change quietly. Small opportunities arose. Some people offered jobs or connections to help improve his situation. Others gave gifts of appreciation, from gift cards to handwritten notes. He accepted some of these gestures, declined others, always staying humble. What mattered to him was not the material recognition, but the way people responded with gratitude and kindness. It reminded him that even small actions could have a ripple effect far beyond what anyone imagined. Despite the attention, he continued to work his usual hours, driving through streets, picking up food, and delivering it to strangers. Each time he drove past the street where the incident had occurred, he remembered the fear, the adrenaline, and the child's trust in him. He realized that life was fragile, and that one moment could change everything. It was a lesson he carried with him, and one he quietly shared with the people he met. The boy continued to grow closer to him. They spent afternoons together, walking in parks, visiting libraries, or simply talking about life. The child often asked questions about courage, about what it meant to be brave, and about why the driver had acted without hesitation. The driver answered honestly, telling him that bravery wasn't about being fearless, it was about caring enough to step forward when it mattered most. He hoped that these lessons would shape the boy's understanding of the world and encourage him to act with compassion in his own life. The family became a larger part of his daily life. The boy's parents invited him to family dinners, celebrations, and small gatherings. They treated him not as a stranger or a hero, but as a trusted friend and mentor. The driver, in turn, found comfort and joy in these interactions, recognizing that the bond formed in a single, terrifying moment had blossomed into something enduring and meaningful. Community leaders began reaching out to him, asking him to participate in discussions about safety, community engagement, and heroism. He spoke openly, sharing his experience and the lessons he had learned. He emphasized the importance of small everyday acts of kindness, the courage to act when someone is in danger, and the ways in which ordinary people can create extraordinary impact. Audiences listened intently, inspired by his humility and sincerity. As the story gained more attention, offers of assistance and opportunities grew. People offered to help him improve his work situation, to provide education for his family, and to connect him with resources he hadn't previously had access to. He accepted some, politely declined others, and remained grounded in the knowledge that his life had not changed because of fame or wealth, but because of the human connections forged in moments of courage and compassion. The driver also reflected on his own family. He thought about the lessons he wanted to pass on to his children, about the importance of integrity, courage, and empathy. He realized that the story of the morning when he had protected a child could serve as a model for the values he hoped to instill. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, no matter how small, had the potential to ripple outward and touch lives in ways that were often unseen. Despite the attention, the driver remained humble. He continued his work, drove his usual routes, and lived quietly, always aware of the extraordinary impact a single decision could have. He understood that heroism wasn't measured in accolades or social media attention, but in the moments when someone chooses to act for the good of another. And in that knowledge he found a quiet satisfaction, a sense of purpose that transcended recognition or fame. The boy, now safe and growing, continued to thrive under the watchful care of his parents and the guidance of the driver. Their relationship deepened, built on trust, gratitude, and shared experiences. The driver saw glimpses of the child's character forming: curiosity, empathy, and a quiet strength that reflected the lessons learned from surviving that terrifying morning. Through all of this, the driver realized that his actions had created something larger than himself. Communities were talking about courage, neighbors were more vigilant and caring, and children were learning the value of stepping forward to help others. The story of the Uber Eats driver who had saved a child during a shooting became more than a news clip. It became a symbol of human compassion, of the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary choices. And in quiet moments, when he returned, life for the driver began to change in ways he had never imagined. What had started as a routine job, delivering meals from one place to another, had transformed into something far bigger. The videos of him saving the young boy from the shooting had gone viral, and suddenly he found himself in the center of a story that people across the country were following closely. Yet despite all the attention, he remained grounded, insisting to anyone who asked that he had only done what anyone would have done in that situation. One morning, he woke up to find his phone flooded with messages. Emails, calls, notifications, and messages from strangers poured in from every direction. People offered words of thanks, gestures of kindness, and even help with bills or opportunities to improve his life. Some were from ordinary citizens who had been moved by his courage. Others were from community leaders and organizations eager to meet him. The sheer volume of attention was overwhelming, but it also made him realize that his actions had inspired more than he could have imagined. Despite the overwhelming attention, he decided to keep his daily routines as normal as possible. He drove through the city streets, picking up and delivering food, stopping at familiar corners and greeting people in the neighborhoods he had always worked in. Yet everywhere he went, he noticed small changes. Neighbors waved more, children smiled when they recognized him, and shopkeepers offered free drinks or snacks in appreciation. The driver accepted these gestures with a humble smile, always quick to redirect attention away from himself. The boy's family remained at the center of his life. The child, once frozen with fear during the shooting, now approached him with laughter, curiosity, and trust. He would show drawings he had made, ask questions about the world, or talk about his friends at school. The driver encouraged the boy to be brave, to look out for others, and to remember that even small acts of kindness could make a big difference. Their bond grew stronger every day, built on trust, gratitude, and shared experiences that neither would ever forget. One afternoon, the boy's parents invited the driver over for a simple dinner. The table was modest with home-cooked food, but it was filled with warmth. They spoke about the days following the shooting, about how the boy had been adjusting, and about the overwhelming attention the family had received. The driver listened quietly, occasionally offering small comments or advice, always careful not to dominate the conversation. The family treated him as one of their own, and the driver felt a sense of belonging he had never expected to find. As weeks passed, he began to receive invitations to speak publicly about his experience. Schools, community centers, and local organizations wanted him to share his story with children and adults alike. At first, he was hesitant. Public speaking had never been a part of his life, and the thought of standing in front of a room full of people was intimidating. Yet he realized that by sharing his story, he could inspire others, teach lessons about courage, and encourage people to act in moments of need. He decided to accept the invitations, carefully preparing to speak from the heart without embellishing or exaggerating the events. When he first spoke at a school, he was nervous. Children stared at him with wide eyes, listening closely as he described the morning of the shooting. He told them about the fear, the sound of gunfire, the boy frozen in place, and the decision to act. He spoke simply, honestly, and with humility. Courage isn't about being fearless, he told them. It's about choosing to do the right thing even when you're scared. Sometimes it's the small choices that make the biggest difference. The children listened intently, some whispering to their neighbors, others nodding as they absorbed the lesson. By the end of the session, many of them approached him with questions, gratitude, or simply to say, "Thank you." The media continued to follow his story. Reporters wanted interviews. Talk shows invited him to speak, and online platforms shared updates about his life. Some of the attention was overwhelming, and there were moments when he felt exposed and uncomfortable. Yet he remained humble, focusing on the bigger picture. The boy had survived, lives had been touched, and his actions had inspired countless others. He spoke openly about his daily routines, about his family, and about the lessons he had learned from a single moment of instinctual courage. The driver's own family was supportive but also cautious. They were proud of him, but they worried about the attention and the potential for intrusion. They reminded him to stay grounded, to continue living simply, and to remember why he had acted in the first place. He listened carefully, taking their advice to heart. Despite the fame, he continued to work, deliver food, and maintain the life he had always known. As the weeks turned into months, his story began to have a tangible impact on the community. Local leaders praised him for his courage. Neighborhood programs used his example to teach children about safety and empathy, and ordinary people shared his story as a reminder of the power of humanity. The driver realized that the ripple effect of his actions extended far beyond the moment of the shooting. It had inspired conversations, strengthened communities, and reminded people that even ordinary actions could have extraordinary consequences. During this time, the boy continued to grow and thrive. He excelled in school, developed friendships, and displayed a newfound confidence that came from knowing someone had risked their life to protect him. The driver watched with pride, seeing the impact of his actions reflected in the boy's courage, empathy, and sense of responsibility. They spent afternoons together exploring parks, reading books, and discussing the importance of helping others. Each interaction reinforced the bond between them and highlighted the long-term effect of a single, courageous decision. The driver also began to think about his own life and future. He considered opportunities he had never thought possible, including community work, speaking engagements, and potential connections that could improve his situation. While he remained cautious and humble, he understood that his actions had opened doors not just for him but for his family as well. People offered support in meaningful ways, from helping with bills to providing guidance and mentorship. He accepted what could help, declined what he felt unnecessary, and focused on living with integrity and humility. One day he received an unexpected invitation. A local organization dedicated to promoting community safety and youth mentorship wanted him to speak at a national conference. The driver was nervous but recognized the opportunity to reach a wider audience. At the conference, he shared his story with hundreds of people, from community leaders to parents, teachers, and children. He spoke about the moment of danger, the instinct to act, and the lessons learned about courage, compassion, and the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary choices. The audience listened with rapt attention. Many moved to tears, others inspired to take action in their own communities. The driver's humility continued to resonate. He refused to accept personal accolades or recognition beyond what was necessary. He emphasized the importance of the boy's survival, the role of community, and the lesson that courage could be found in everyday choices. People admired not only his bravery but also his refusal to be swayed by fame or attention. He had become a symbol of quiet heroism, a reminder that ordinary people could shape the world through selfless acts. Meanwhile, the boy's family became advocates for community safety and youth protection, inspired by the driver's actions. They worked with local schools, organized events, and spoke about the importance of courage and empathy. The driver remained closely involved, offering guidance and support while continuing his everyday life. Together, they created a network of care, education, and awareness that strengthened their neighborhood and set an example for others. Despite the whirlwind of attention and opportunities, the driver's core remained unchanged. He continued to drive for Uber Eats, delivering food and greeting people with the same warmth and respect he always had. He continued to prioritize his family, his responsibilities, and the small joys of everyday life. Fame, attention, and accolades had come and gone, but his commitment to integrity, courage, and compassion remained steadfast. He often reflected on that morning of the shooting. The fear, the adrenaline, the child frozen in place, all of it stayed with him. He realized that the moment had defined not only the boy's life but also his own. It had reshaped his understanding of courage, responsibility, and the impact of ordinary choices. It had taught him that true heroism was not measured by recognition, but by the willingness to act when it mattered most. The driver also saw the long-term impact on the boy. He noticed the child's growth, confidence, and empathy, understanding that these traits had been influenced by a single, selfless act. Their relationship remained strong, built on trust, shared experiences, and a mutual understanding of what it meant to act bravely in the face of fear. Through it all, the driver's story continued to inspire. Communities shared it as an example of courage. Schools used it to teach lessons about empathy, and individuals carried it as a reminder that even small actions could create lasting change. The driver never sought attention, but he recognized that his story had become more than his own. It had become a lesson for countless others, a beacon of hope and inspiration in a world often filled with fear and uncertainty. The days and months following the shooting had changed the driver's life in ways he could not have imagined. What had begun as a routine job delivering meals had grown into something far bigger than he ever expected. He had become a symbol of courage, a reminder that ordinary people could make extraordinary choices, and his story had touched lives across the nation. Yet, through all the attention, he remained humble, focused on his family, his work, and the boy whose life he had saved. News outlets continued to share updates about him, and the videos that had gone viral remained in the public eye. People spoke of him as a hero, a man whose instinctive courage had saved a child's life. Some compared him to historical figures known for bravery, while others simply marveled at the fact that someone so ordinary could act in such an extraordinary way. The driver paid little attention to comparisons or praise. For him, the memory of the boy's small hands clutching his shirt and the fear in the child's eyes was what mattered most. That was the moment that defined the significance of everything he had done. The boy, now older and more confident, continued to grow in a safe and loving environment. He excelled in school, developed strong friendships, and showed a quiet strength that reflected the lessons he had learned from surviving the shooting. The driver watched him closely, feeling proud not just of the child's accomplishments but also of the trust and bond they had formed. Every time he saw the boy laugh freely, run without fear, or speak with confidence, the driver felt a sense of fulfillment that no amount of recognition could match. As time passed, the driver's story became more than just a news headline. Community organizations began using his example to teach lessons about bravery, empathy, and the importance of looking out for one another. Schools held discussions about his actions, encouraging children to think about how they could help others in their own lives. Neighborhood programs emphasized the value of instinctive kindness, courage, and the impact of everyday decisions. The driver's simple act had rippled outward in ways he could never have predicted. One afternoon, he was invited to speak at a nationwide conference focused on heroism and community service. Hundreds of people gathered, listening intently as he shared his story. He spoke honestly, recounting the morning of the shooting, the panic, the fear, and the decision to act. He described the boy frozen in the street, the sound of gunfire, and the rush of adrenaline that had propelled him to shield the child. He emphasized the importance of empathy, courage, and acting when someone else's life is at stake. His words resonated deeply with the audience, leaving many moved to tears and others inspired to think differently about their own actions. After the conference, he was approached by people from all walks of life, teachers, parents, community leaders, and even children, who thanked him for sharing his story. They spoke of how his actions had changed their perspective, encouraged them to act in difficult situations, and reminded them that courage could exist in ordinary moments. The driver listened humbly, always redirecting attention to the importance of community, family, and the boy he had saved. He insisted that he had done nothing remarkable, only what anyone should do when faced with a life in danger. Meanwhile, the boy's family remained deeply connected to him. They had grown close through shared experiences, gratitude, and trust. The child's parents often invited the driver to family gatherings, celebrations, and community events. They treated him as a friend, mentor, and part of their family. The driver in turn cherished these moments, seeing them as a reflection of the bond created in a single, terrifying moment that had now blossomed into something enduring. As the story gained more recognition, opportunities continued to arise. The driver was approached by organizations offering scholarships, mentorship programs, and chances to further his education. People also offered assistance to improve his living situation, support for his family, and connections that could help him achieve long-term stability. He accepted some of these offers, always with humility, while declining others that he felt were unnecessary. For him, the most important reward remained the knowledge that he had saved a life and made a difference. One evening, as he walked through the neighborhood, he noticed children playing freely on the streets, neighbors greeting each other warmly, and a sense of community that had grown stronger since the incident. He realized that his actions had not only saved a child, but had also inspired a broader sense of care and vigilance in the people around him. The ripple effect of one moment of courage had become visible in everyday life, in small gestures, smiles, and acts of kindness. The boy, now thriving and confident, often spoke about the day of the shooting. He asked questions about what the driver had felt, how he had made the decision to act, and what it meant to be brave. The driver answered honestly, explaining that bravery was not about being fearless, but about choosing to act despite fear. He emphasized the importance of compassion, empathy, and the power of ordinary people to make extraordinary choices. The boy listened intently, absorbing the lessons and carrying them into his own life. The driver also reflected on his own journey. He thought about how much had changed since that morning, how his story had touched countless lives, and how he had grown as a person. He realized that courage was not something he had sought, but something that had been revealed in a moment of instinct.
He understood that true heroism was not measured by fame or recognition,
but by the impact of one's actions on the lives of others. As his story spread further, the driver received invitations from schools, community organizations, and even national programs to speak about courage and empathy. He continued to share his experiences, always emphasizing the importance of ordinary people acting with extraordinary care when it mattered most. His message resonated widely, reminding audiences that heroism could be found in the smallest actions, and that compassion could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. The boy's parents often spoke publicly about the driver, highlighting his humility, courage, and the lasting impact of his actions. They shared stories of his continued involvement in the child's life, the guidance he provided, and the way he had helped shape the child's understanding of bravery and responsibility. Their words further reinforced the driver's legacy, demonstrating that his actions had created a lasting bond not just with one family, but with the wider community. Despite all the attention, the driver remained grounded. He continued to work, drive through the city streets, and maintain his daily routines. He focused on the simple joys of life, spending time with his family, helping the boy grow, and living with integrity. Fame and recognition were secondary. What mattered most was the knowledge that he had acted when it counted and had made a real, lasting difference. Over time, the community began to honor him in various ways. Local leaders recognized his courage, schools celebrated his example, and community centers used his story as a teaching tool. Children learned the importance of helping others. Neighbors strengthened their bonds, and the broader public saw a reminder that heroism often comes from ordinary people choosing to act with compassion. The driver had become a symbol of hope, courage, and humanity in a world that often seemed focused on fear and conflict. The boy continued to grow, inspired by the driver's actions and guidance. He excelled academically, developed strong friendships, and showed a quiet strength that reflected the lessons he had learned. He often spoke about the driver, sharing the story with friends and teachers, emphasizing the importance of courage, empathy, and standing up for others. The driver watched with pride, knowing that the impact of one morning had shaped the boy's character and would continue to influence his life for years to come. One day, the driver was invited to a national ceremony, recognizing ordinary citizens who had performed extraordinary acts. As he stood on the stage looking out at the audience, he felt a mix of humility, gratitude, and quiet pride. He spoke about the day of the shooting, the instinctive decision to act, and the lessons he had learned about courage and compassion. He emphasized that heroism was not about recognition, but about doing the right thing when it mattered most. The audience listened intently, many moved to tears, others inspired to reflect on their own actions. After the ceremony, people approached him to express gratitude, share stories, and seek advice. He listened patiently, always redirecting attention to the importance of empathy, community, and caring for others. He reminded people that courage could be found in everyday moments, that even small actions could ripple outward, and that ordinary people could create extraordinary change. Through it all, the driver's life remained rooted in simplicity. He continued to deliver meals, spend time with his family, and nurture his bond with the boy. Yet he had also become a mentor, a symbol, and an inspiration. His story had reached far beyond the neighborhood where it had begun, touching countless lives and reminding people that bravery, empathy, and humanity could exist in anyone, at any moment. Years later, when he reflected on that morning, he realized that a single decision had changed everything, not just for the boy, but for himself, his family, and the community. What had started as instinct, a moment of fear and courage, had created a legacy of hope, compassion, and inspiration. He had acted without